Hey everyone, RogueGold here. Welcome back to the Division 2, and today I want to dive into one Endgame. You might be wondering, what is that? Well, that's what I want to demonstrate and explain in this video. The game had its latest major update in season begin just last week, and the highlight feature that delivered aside from the new seasonal content was this one Endgame change, promising to make the game less needlessly complex and unite the player base under one roof and one endgame. So, whether you're an existing player who's just curious to see what exactly has changed, or maybe you're brand new to the division as a whole and you want an idea of if this has made the game potentially more accessible and attractive for you, I aim to please both crowds with this video. As we dive in here, I ask one humble request. If this video ends up being informative and helps you out, then I would appreciate you leaving a like on it. It helps out more than you know. And if you haven't already and you want to stay up to date on the latest with the game, then consider clicking that subscribe button. There's plenty more for me on the way. But without further ado, let's go. Okay, so at a base level, what one endgame has done for the Division 2 is streamline your leveling progression. Meaning for new players or anybody making secondary characters, you now have more agency and choice for how you want to get your character to max level. And in doing that, the developers have both simplified the game's additions and eliminated any auxiliary costs needed for a player to reach the endgame, so that they can play with the entirety of the Division 2's community. So let's break down exactly how they've done that. And to start, I want to explain the revamped game additions that are now available. Previously, as with many live games that are around for a couple of years, the Division 2 started to accrue a few too many versions of the same product. Whether it was DLC content, optional side packs, gold, silver, titanium editions, you know what I'm talking about, things can get confusing after a while. As of the start of year 6 for the game, which like I said began just last week, anyone coming to the Division 2 for the first time has now only 2 editions to contemplate between. And to help differentiate them, Ubisoft has released this handy graphic that I'll put up on screen. By buying the simple base version of the Division 2, the version on the left hand side, you now acquire everything needed to play all of the Division 2's core content, that being the base game as well as the Warlords of New York expansion, which while is no longer required content as we'll cover, it is still a paid exclusive experience that does offer its own story campaign, additional open world map, and some gameplay options like new skills. But that expansion is now included by default when you buy the main game. Your other option for buying the Division 2 on the right hand side is the Ultimate Edition, and what I appreciate about this streamlining is that they've taken a lot of the old side packs, different tiers, whatever, and just bundled it all into this one purchase. You get the base game, the Warlords expansion, as well as things like the Year 1 Pass, which offers some minor exclusive content and some progression fast tracking and bypassing, and then several cosmetic packs with clothing, weapon and skill skins, etc. That's it. Those are the 2 editions of the game to choose from. And hopefully I think that should help anybody new coming to the game get a much clearer picture about what their options are. But let's now turn back to the game itself. What has been done in-game to unify the player base as I was talking about? Well, to demonstrate this and experience it for myself, I've spent the last week since this update went live leveling an all-new character. So that will be the entirety of the background footage that you see in this video. The simplest explanation I can give of what one endgame has done for the gameplay experience is this. Prior to this update, levels 1 through 30 happened in the game's base Washington, D.C. map. That's how the game was when it first launched. Then upon the release of its paid expansion, Warlords of New York, the only way to reach the new maximum level cap of 40 was to buy that expansion and play the new story campaign in New York. And that was fine, pretty standard for looter shooter and MMO light type titles like this, but it meant that for all future content released by the game, including the new seasonal model released with the expansion, you had to own Warlords and be at level 40 to play it. Meaning anyone who chose not to buy the expansion and stay at level 30, they now had their own separate stagnant endgame. And anyone who bought the Division 2, let's say for $5 at GameStop, they couldn't actually reach the endgame and the point where the vast majority of the player base resided at, because without the expansion they were stuck at 30. So this new one endgame feature made some big changes. For one, it has decoupled the Warlords of New York expansion from the game's central progression, meaning for anybody who owned the game years ago but never bought the expansion, or one of those aforementioned $5 GameStop buyers, each and every owner of the base Division 2 game can now continue beyond level 30 in the base Washington, D.C. map, and reach level 40 joining the player base in the quote-unquote true endgame, subsequently unlocking all of the free content that you previously needed to own Warlords in order to access. As part of this leveling change, they also went in and simplified or removed many outdated and unnecessary legacy systems. This includes world tiers, which used to be this mostly arbitrary post-level 30 grind, where you had to climb through world tiers 1 to 5 in order to reach the highest tiers of content and challenges. The system just didn't really offer that much value. It was there to extend playtime after reaching max level, and you didn't really get any true feeling of progression or accomplishment as you went through it. World tiers are now gone, meaning you can go from level 30 to 31 and then beyond seamlessly. They also transitioned the gear system from the old level 30 endgame, which used to rely on a gear score ranking system, to the same gear system and setup used in the true level 40 endgame, meaning that for the entirety of the 1 to 40 leveling experience, players will only encounter one format of gear, which should alleviate confusion and improve comprehension by the time they reach the endgame. So those are far from the only changes made, but are most of the major ones that outline how they've reformatted character progression and streamlined the entire experience to the endgame. Of course, if you want to play the game the old way, where you do levels 1 to 30 in DC and then 31 to 40 in New York, you still can. Nothing has changed there. And the level 30 character boost still exists for expansion owners if you want to use that, or you could start Warlords at level 35. Do it as a post-campaign experience once you're at 40. They even let you freely travel between DC and New York now once you've begun the expansion to reflect its new non-required status. But bottom line, the barrier to entry to get new players into the Division 2's endgame has lowered, and the choices players have on how to progress with the various additions and content they have expanded. So, as I said, I leveled my own new character under this system, and while of course I do own the Warlords expansion, I wanted to simulate that new player experience and see how the full 1 to 40 leveling process was by staying solely in DC and interacting with the content there. Levels 1 through 30 were, unsurprisingly, mostly the same. I played through the campaign, which requires you to be at level 30 before playing the final mission at the Capitol building. The game then seamlessly transitions into the invasion setting, which was previously tied to those world tiers that we talked about. And for anyone who doesn't know, the invasion revolves around the introduction of one final new enemy faction for the game. They retake old mission locations and create new variations of those for you to play through with their faction's own twist on it. So, after that happened, I just kept going on through that invasion content. Again, no world tiers. My loot was scaled from 1 to 40, so by levels 31, 32, I was still mostly using purple gear, heading towards high ends being more common. After each invaded stronghold I cleared, there was still an instance shift. This is where the world tier progression used to happen after a few hours of grinding. I assume this is a technical limitation that they had to keep, but again, that in-between grind is gone. I just went from one mission to the next to the next. I went up towards level 35, played through Tidal Basin, which is technically the actual main last campaign mission, and then after that, I just played through a few different content pieces to push towards 40. I checked out some of the post-launch story content like the Pentagon and Coney Island. Notably, they've also now made those activities entirely optional. The game will not force you to go there in order to continue leveling up. I ended up doing a run of the Descent game mode for some XP, and then I finally crested that final hill to reach level 40 off of a side mission. My journey was complete. And the final neat detail that I wanted to point out in all of this, previously one of the reasons that it was so crucial to play through the Warlords expansion, well, I mean, it was required to reach 40, but at the end of that campaign, through story purposes, you gain access to an upgraded SHD watch. And this is an all-new progression system with infinite leveling, stat gains, etc. And so of course, non-Warlords owners at level 30 never got it. But with the one endgame change, you now just automatically unlock this upon reaching level 40, which does create some slight oddities in the lore continuity, but whatever. Again, this character I played on never stepped foot in New York. I stayed in DC exclusively, and once I hit 40, I went into my menu and the game guided me to unlocking the new watch, saying that I now have access to Aaron Keener's watch and going through that same whole flow of tutorials and whatnot. So in just about every way, the devs have streamlined, simplified, and made the Division 2 and its endgame far more accessible to far more players. Anyone who's ever owned the game or picks it up now can reach the same endgame as every other player plays in. They have access to the same systems, the same power, and not only is that just a sensible move for player engagement and comprehension, but hopefully for us longtime players, it means that we see even better matchmaking pools and availability, as there's no doubt going to be a surge and continual influx of new agents to the fight. With that, my friends, I wrap up my overview and breakdown of the Division 2's new one endgame feature, which does a lot to simplify the Division 2 experience as a whole. It guts out some of those legacy systems that are no longer relevant or needed, smoothens the leveling experience as a whole, and unites the game's player base into one group. I see that as a positive change, and I certainly hope that it does make the Division 2 more approachable for those newer players, and that in turn can aid the game even further when it comes to word of mouth and things like that. It's not always easy for a 5 going on 6-year-old looter shooter to remain relevant and accessible for brand new audiences, so it's good to know that that's still something that the devs are keeping in mind. That's all for the info and coverage I've got on this one, folks. I hope it helped out. Any questions or follow-up comments you may have regarding one Endgame or anything we covered in here, whether you might be a brand new or prospective player or someone who's been around for years, let me know all of it down in the comments below. And that's all I've got for this one, everybody. Thank you all so much for watching. I'll see you in the next one. RogueGold. Out.